How do you deal with finding out your wife is living a double life? In just one day, everything I thought I knew crumbled. What started as a normal morning ended in a life-altering revelation. What I discovered will keep you on edge. The day started off like any other, same routine, almost like I was going through the motions without thinking. Even though I'd been out of the military for years, that sense of discipline never really goes away. My morning began with an early workout, a quick breakfast, and diving straight into my to-do list. It all felt automatic by now, but there was this nagging feeling in my gut that something was off, like today wasn't going to be as ordinary as it seemed. Looking back, that feeling was a warning I should have paid more attention to. For the longest time, I told myself I had everything under control, a solid marriage, a steady job, and a comfortable home. But life has a funny way of sneaking up on you, hitting you when you least expect it. Thinking back now, the signs were always there, I just chose to ignore them, convinced that everything was just fine. You can't turn back time, though. All you can do is brace yourself when things start falling apart. That day, I got blindsided by a betrayal I never saw coming. During my deployments, I'd survived 3 ambushes, each one driving home some hard lessons. First rule, stay vigilant and catch the warning signs early. Unfortunately, I missed them when it came to Lauren and her boss, Chris Morrison. Second rule, take cover when the danger hits, which is exactly what I did, retreating to my room to collect my thoughts. The third, you've got to come up with a plan, fast. I knew I had to move quickly, so I changed into something casual and slipped my phone into my shirt pocket, setting it to record. Lauren and I had been married for 8 years, and we had 3 amazing kids, Josh, our 7-year-old, and the twins, Ava and Chloe, who were 6. My family meant everything to me, and I made sure my work didn't steal too much time away from them. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, our parents were nearby, and they often came over to spend time with the kids. Lauren's sister lived close by too, and it felt like we had the perfect life, or so I thought, right up until it all came crashing down. After Lauren went back to work once the kids were in school, I should have picked up on the signs, but I was blind to them. She started dressing more provocatively, and the connection between us faded. She began spending more time at the office, and when I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying it was a great career opportunity that would help us in the long run. Her boss, Chris Morrison, was someone I had met at a few work functions, cocky, with no sense of boundaries. I never liked the guy. Whenever I'd visit her at the office, he acted like he couldn't wait for her to get back to work. I should have noticed the red flags, but I didn't. Everything unraveled not long after the twins finished their first year of school. The kids were with my parents for the weekend, and I had been looking forward to some quality time with Lauren, like the old days. But when I walked through the door that evening, she was already dressed to impress, looking stunning like she was heading out for a big night. "Wow, you look amazing." "If I'd known we had a date night planned, I would have come home earlier," I said with a grin. "Just give me a second to freshen up, and I'll be ready." "So, where are we going?" Her expression changed, she gave me this cold, unfamiliar smirk. "We're not going anywhere," she said flatly. "I am, but not with you." I stopped in my tracks. "What? What are you talking about?" I asked, completely thrown off. "I'm going out with my boss, Chris Morrison, and this is just the start. From now on, things are going to be different. Chris is picking me up, and I'll be staying at his downtown condo tonight. I'll be back Sunday," she said, her voice disturbingly calm and matter-of-fact. "What the hell are you talking about?" I yelled, my shock quickly turning into anger. "Calm down, Mike. This is how it's going to be from now on. I'll leave tonight, but I'll be back. We're still married, and I'll continue living here. I love you, but I need more than what we have. If you make this difficult for me, it won't end well for you. The kids don't need their dad sitting behind bars. Let's just sit down, okay? Chris will be here in about 30 minutes, and I'd prefer to explain everything before he shows up. Trust me, you don't want him explaining it, she said, sitting down with this unnerving calmness. If that guy steps foot in this house, he's not leaving without a few bruises, I growled, the anger rising inside me. You don't want to go there, Lauren warned, her tone sharp. Chris isn't coming alone. His driver, Tony, will be with him, and Tony doesn't mess around. He wouldn't hesitate to send you to the hospital. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the same surge I used to get in the heat of dangerous situations overseas. But this wasn't some battlefield, this was my own home, and I was under attack, cornered by my wife and her lover. The odds were stacked against me. Give me 5 minutes, I muttered, heading upstairs to clear my thoughts. Once in my bedroom, I reminded myself of the rules I lived by in hostile situations: evaluate the threat, find cover, and devise a plan. I'd already failed to see this ambush coming, but at least I had time to regroup and prepare. I changed into casual clothes, set my phone to record, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I opened the closet, grabbed the key hidden inside an old shoebox, and unlocked my safe. Inside was my service pistol, a 9mm Glock that had seen me through some rough patches. Just as I loaded the gun, Lauren's voice rang out from downstairs. Get down here, Mike, or you'll regret it. Be there in a second. Grab me a beer while you're at it, I called back, finishing loading the last round. I tucked the gun behind my waistband, making sure it was hidden under my shirt. With my phone still recording, I headed downstairs, ready to confront Lauren and find out just how far this betrayal had gone. When I walked into the living room, Lauren was sitting at the dining table with a glass of wine in front of her. She had already placed a cold beer on the table for me. Took you long enough, she said with a smirk. We need to talk before Chris gets here. Looks like you've got a lot to say, I replied, keeping my voice steady. She took a slow breath before speaking. I want you to understand that I still love you, Mike. I always have, but things have changed. I want to grow old with you, but I also need something else in my life. Cut the nonsense, Lauren. Let's drop the sugarcoating. You call me Mike, and I'll call you Lauren. Let's keep it simple, I interrupted, not interested in the emotional charade. She gave me a sharp look but went on. Chris and I have been seeing each other for about 7 months. It started as harmless flirting, but now, well, it's gone way beyond that. I was flattered by his attention, Lauren continued, her voice steady, and eventually, it escalated into something more. Clearly, thinking about the fallout wasn't high on your list, I replied, trying to control my anger. I'm sorry, Mike, but that doesn't change the fact that I still love you. You're the person I want to spend my life with, she said, like that was supposed to make it better somehow. Yeah, good luck with that, I muttered under my breath. Why come clean now, after months of hiding it? She sighed. We're both tired of sneaking around. Chris and I want to live openly, no more secrets, just being together, traveling, enjoying life. The only way that can happen is if you accept it. Good luck with that, I repeated, louder this time. No, Mike. We're staying married. You just have to accept that I'll be spending time with Chris. I'll stay over at his place, travel with him, go to events. It'll even benefit us financially. Think about it, vacations, college funds for the kids, renovations on the lake house, she explained, as if this was some kind of business arrangement. If you think I'm going to accept anything that guy's money touches, you're seriously mistaken, I fired back. Lauren's face tightened with frustration. I'm not just some fling, Mike. I'm a valuable asset at the company, and I'm proud to be Chris's partner. This isn't going to last forever, maybe a few years, and then things will go back to normal. And Chris? What's his endgame in all of this? I asked, my anger rising, though I tried to keep it under control. Chris wants to be your friend too, she said, as if that was supposed to smooth things over. He thinks we can all make it work, as long as everyone gets what they need. He knows I love you and want you in my life. He could even be like an uncle to the kids. That set my blood boiling. He'll never come near my kids. Not ever. Got it? Lauren hesitated for a moment, then added, he's married, you know. His wife's from a wealthy family with a lot of influence, but she can't have children. Sounds like he's got his own issues to deal with, I shot back. Maybe he should focus on adopting and stay the hell out of other people's lives. Chris wants his own child, though, someone to take over the firm someday. He prefers a son, but he'd be happy with a daughter too, Lauren said, avoiding eye contact. So why doesn't he just get a surrogate and have as many kids as he wants? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around this insanity. He's thought about that, she admitted, but he thinks he wouldn't make a great father. He wants his child raised in a loving home. The anger inside me was reaching its peak. So what, he's planning to get you pregnant and expects me to raise his kid? It's not like that, Lauren insisted. The baby would be ours too. You'd love them because you love me, and I'd love them just as much. The child would have Chris's last name, and he'd pay us handsomely to raise them, covering everything from diapers to college. I stared at her, absolutely stunned. Are you pregnant already? No, she replied, but Chris wants me to stop taking birth control soon. I told him I needed you on board with this first. This just keeps getting worse, I muttered under my breath. Stop saying that, Lauren snapped, her patience wearing thin. I know this is a lot to take in, but eventually, we're hoping you'll come around. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Lauren jumped up to answer it, and in walked Chris Morrison himself, casually throwing an arm around her and kissing her cheek like he owned the place. This just keeps getting worse, I muttered again, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. How'd he take it? Chris asked, his voice smooth and casual. Not well, Lauren replied, shooting me a glance. I think it's time you explain the consequences, Chris. Chris, a tall, stocky man with graying hair and an air of arrogance, stepped forward, locking eyes with me. Mr. Thompson, we need to have a conversation. Conversation? I should throw you out of this house, I growled, my fists clenched. Chris smirked, completely unbothered. You could try, but my driver will have you in handcuffs before you even make a move. And believe me, you don't want to spend the night in a cell. Why don't we sit down and handle this like adults? I glanced at the big guy standing by the door, his eyes fixed on me. With a sigh, I gave in and sat down, knowing I was outnumbered. Good. Now here's how it's going to go, Chris said, his tone all business. Your wife agreed to be my personal assistant, and that comes with some extra responsibilities. We've been involved for about 6 months, and we're done hiding. From now on, you're going to have to accept the new arrangement. I'll be taking care of Lauren most of the time, whether it's at the office or at my place, but occasionally, she'll entertain me here when you're not around. You think I'm just going to stand by and let this happen? I'll file for divorce before I let this insanity continue, I snapped. Chris remained calm, almost disinterested. I'd think twice if I were you. I'm one of the most influential lawyers in this state, and my firm has connections you can't even imagine. If you try to divorce Lauren, I'll make sure you walk away with nothing, no house, no savings, and no kids. You'll be drowning in child support and alimony while I enjoy life with her. You might even lose your job. And as for your friends and family, they'll abandon you once I'm through. I sat there, stunned, finally understanding just how far Lauren and Chris were willing to go. Chris held all the cards, and he knew it. He was warning me that if I fought back, the consequences would be devastating, not just in court, but in every part of my life. Be smart, Mike. Accept the new reality. Things will be a lot smoother that way. Lauren's a great partner, and I'm sure we can all coexist without any problems, Chris added, a smug smile creeping across his face. I turned to Lauren, searching for any sign of regret in her eyes. "Would you really go through with this?" I asked quietly. "I don't want to, Mike," she answered softly, "but I won't have to if you just cooperate. In time, this will feel normal. You'll get used to it." Still in disbelief, I watched as they moved toward the door. But before they could leave, I spoke up. "Hold on. I've got a few things to say before you go," I said, keeping my voice low but firm. Chris rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed. "Make it quick. I'll pour myself a drink or two to mourn what's left of my marriage, and then I'll give your wife a call. After that, I think I'll ring Lauren's sister, Melissa. I'm sure she'd love to fill in your in-laws about everything," I said calmly. Chris's expression shifted, caught off guard. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice tightening. I ignored him. "I'm not done," I continued, my tone steady. "Tomorrow morning, I'll change every lock in this house. Then I'm going to take Olivia, that woman down the street, out for a nice dinner and some dancing. She's been eyeing me for months, and I haven't entertained the idea until now. But things are different." Lauren's face twisted with pain. "Mike, you can't do that." I pressed on, disregarding her protest. "When you get back on Sunday, you'll find all your stuff out on the lawn. I'd suggest picking it up before the sprinklers go off on Monday morning." Chris's face turned beet red, his fists clenching as he realized his threats weren't getting to me. Lauren looked devastated. I wasn't finished yet. "Oh, and one last thing," I added. "First thing Monday morning, I'll be sitting down with a divorce attorney. I'll file for infidelity, and I'll make sure you, Chris, are named as a co-defendant. I'll also hit you with a lawsuit for alienation of affection and for violating your firm's ethics. Even if it doesn't hold up, the media coverage alone will ruin your career." Chris's anger boiled over, and he slammed his overnight bag against the wall. He stormed toward me, jabbing a finger hard into my chest, his face inches from mine. I held myself back from decking him right then and there. "Listen up, you idiot," he spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm Chris Morrison, head of the biggest law firm in the state. I can tear you apart in court before the day's even done. By the time I get back to my penthouse tonight, you'll be sitting in a cell on trumped-up charges. You really think you can take me on? You can't. I own the police, the district attorney, the judges, they all owe me favors. One wrong step, and I'll end your life as you know it." He was on a roll, ranting, and I let him go on, my fists clenched tight at my sides. "If you take Olivia out tomorrow, the police will pull you over. They'll plant drugs in your car, and you'll be facing years of legal hell. No lawyer will risk going up against me. Meanwhile, I'll still be enjoying time with your wife while you're left with nothing. Got it, Mike?" "Yeah, sure," I replied sarcastically. "I totally believe every word." Chris glared at me, his face flushing with rage. "Show some respect. Call me Mr. Morrison, or sir. One more smart remark, and Tony will teach you a lesson." He lunged at me, aiming to land a punch, but I was quicker, shoving him back onto the couch before he could make contact. Lauren rushed to his side as he yelled, "You'll pay for this. Tony, get in here." The front door swung open, and Tony, Chris's towering driver, stepped inside, his presence menacing. "Yes, Mr. Morrison," he rumbled in a deep voice. "Teach him a lesson," Chris ordered, and Tony started toward me. Lauren tried to step in, but Chris waved her off like she didn't matter. I'd been ready for trouble ever since Lauren mentioned Chris was bringing his driver, so I was prepared. Tony threw a hard punch toward my head, and the force rattled me. As I tasted blood, a random thought crossed my mind: would the carpet ever come clean after this? Tony hesitated for a moment, uncertain if he should continue, glancing at Chris for further direction. "Hit him again, Tony," Chris barked. I knew I couldn't take much more, but I wasn't about to back down. I spat out blood and taunted, "Is that all you've got? You hit like a kid." Tony's face twisted in anger, and he prepared for another punch. But this time, I was ready. I dodged his blow and, seeing my opportunity, I quickly turned the situation in my favor. Things escalated fast, and Tony's eyes widened as he realized this was no longer just a scuffle, it had become much more dangerous. He fumbled, reaching for something in his jacket. I moved swiftly, disarming him in seconds and pocketing the weapon. Breathing heavily, I stood over him and asked, "How much respect do you think I have for you, Tony?" He groaned in pain, shaking his head. "None," I said coldly, "which means there's nothing stopping me from ending this right now, is there?" Tony slumped to the floor, defeated and in pain. "If you don't get to a hospital soon, you might not make it," I said, the threat hanging in the air. Just then, Lauren screamed a warning. I spun around just in time to see Chris charging at me, brandishing a fireplace poker. I raised my arm to block the hit, but the impact sent a jolt of pain through my body. The poker clattered to the floor, and I scrambled to grab it before he could. My hand found the handle just as Chris reached for it. "Where's your phone?" I demanded, my breath coming fast. Chris hesitated, then pointed toward his coat pocket. I pulled it out and handed it to him. "Unlock it," I ordered. With trembling hands, Chris obeyed. "Now, call your wife." "Use FaceTime," I said, my voice firm. Chris's eyes widened in shock. "What? You heard me. Call your wife." Reluctantly, he tapped the screen, and a moment later, his wife's confused face appeared on the phone. "Chris. Why are you calling me so late?" "And who's that?" she asked, noticing me in the background. "Mrs. Morrison, my name's Mike Thompson." "You don't know me, but your husband knows my wife, Lauren. They've been having an affair for months," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the tension in the room. I tilted the phone to give her a clear view of Chris, lying on the floor, pale and shaking. Kate helped me sit down just as two police cruisers came to a screeching halt in front of the house, sirens wailing. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn, scanning the scene for any threats. The colonel quickly stepped up, explaining that everything was under control, gesturing to the guns he had unloaded and placed on the table. One of the officers turned to me and said, "You need medical attention, sir." Before I could even respond, 2 ambulances arrived, and paramedics rushed in to tend to Max, who was lying unconscious. My head pounded, and Kate urged me to lie down. A medic checked my arm and face, suspecting I had a broken arm. Everything around me started to blur, I could barely make out the chaos. Max being loaded onto a stretcher, Kevin limping toward the other ambulance. Then I saw Lauren, escorted by a female officer, being led toward a police car. She stopped when she spotted me sitting on the porch, tears streaming down her face. "Mike, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this to happen. I never meant for you to get hurt," she cried, reaching out toward me. I recoiled, pushing her away with a cold glare. "Go to hell, Lauren," I said bitterly. Her handler quickly stepped in, guiding her to the car. I wasn't sure if I passed out from the pain or if the medic gave me something, but everything faded to black. The next thing I knew, I woke up 3 days later. My vision was blurry at first, and I could barely make out a figure standing beside my bed. For a second, I thought it might be an angel, but as my sight cleared, I realized it was a nurse, likely in her 60s. "Mr. Thompson, can you hear me?" she asked, relief evident in her voice. "I'm so glad you're awake. Am I in a hospital?" I croaked, my voice weak and raspy. "Yes, you're at Mercy General. You've been unconscious for 3 days, she said gently. 3 days? I exclaimed, trying to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through my body, forcing me back down. "Just take it easy. I'll get the doctor," she reassured me. "My name is Rose, by the way." As Rose left the room, I took stock of my injuries. My right arm was in a cast, my face heavily bandaged, and my left eye and nose ached like hell. I noticed all the machines hooked up to me, a blood pressure cuff on one arm, a saline drip in the other. Then I realized, somewhat uncomfortably, that I had a catheter. A few minutes later, Rose returned with a doctor, who introduced himself as Dr. York. "You've been through quite a rough experience, Mr. Thompson," he said, flipping through my chart. "You've got a fractured forearm, a broken nose, and a pretty nasty black eye. We kept you sedated because you also suffered a minor concussion." I nodded slowly, trying to wrap my head around everything. "It's late, so I'll give you something to help you sleep," Dr. York continued. "We'll reassess your condition in the morning." When I woke again, sunlight was streaming through the window, but something felt off. My left wrist was cuffed to the bed rail. "What the hell?" I muttered, tugging at the metal cuff in disbelief. "Take it easy, Mr. Thompson," came a voice from across the room. A middle-aged man in a suit approached me, introducing himself as Detective Sergeant Adams. "Run? In this condition?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Why would I even try to run?" "You're under arrest," Adams said calmly. "For what?" I asked, my mind racing. "Assault with intent to kill, use of a deadly weapon, and a few other charges, including unlawful discharge of a firearm. These were filed by Chris Morrison on behalf of himself, Tony Franco, and your wife, Lauren," he explained. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the situation crash down on me. I should have seen this coming. Detective Adams read me my rights in a cool, methodical tone, as though this were just another day at the office for him. Once he finished, he left the room, and Rose came back to check my vitals. She didn't say much at first, but her expression was soft, almost sympathetic, like she understood the gravity of what I was going through. "I'm sorry," Rose whispered softly as she adjusted the blood pressure cuff on my arm. I tried to lighten the mood, offering a weak smile. "Well, when all this is over, how about I take you out for dinner, Rose?" She chuckled and shook her head. "Let's get you back on your feet first," she replied, a little warmth returning to the room. Later that day, Dr. York reassured me that my injuries would heal in time. He mentioned I'd be moved to a different room soon, under another doctor's care, but his words barely registered. My mind was still spinning, trying to wrap around the charges looming over me: assault with intent to kill, use of a deadly weapon. How had things spiraled so far out of control? A few hours later, Detective Adams returned, accompanied by orderlies who wheeled me up to the third floor, where a police guard stood outside my new room. Once inside, they uncuffed me and reconnected me to the machines, leaving me alone with the silence of the sterile hospital room. The next day, a young public defender named Sam Wilton showed up to discuss my case. He looked nervous, flipping through his papers before finally looking up at me. "So, Mr. Thompson, we've got a few things to cover," he began, his voice shaky. He went over the charges, the same ones Detective Adams had already mentioned, and then asked how I planned to plead. "Not guilty," I said firmly, cutting him off. "I'm not guilty of any of this." Sam seemed taken aback but continued, informing me that Lauren had been staying with her sister Melissa and that the kids were with them. Hearing that broke something inside me. The thought of my kids thinking I'd be gone for a long time hurt more than I could express. When I asked about my job, Sam said he could reach out to my company and explain the situation. As I skimmed the charges again, one caught my eye: spousal abuse. I pointed at it, confused. "What's this about?" Sam explained that Chris Morrison had added that charge after Lauren claimed I had slapped her. He even had photos of bruises on her face and arm. "I didn't do that," I protested, but Sam's skeptical look said it all. I didn't trust him enough to explain further, afraid that Chris's influence had already seeped into the legal system. "Sam, you need to plead not guilty on my behalf," I insisted. Sam reluctantly agreed but warned that the shooting charge meant I'd likely need to post bail. He didn't seem convinced of my innocence, and I didn't bring up the evidence I had proving self-defense. I wasn't about to risk anything getting back to Chris or the DA. Instead, I asked Sam to contact my uncle, Jack Carter, a retired Navy attorney, to help. I told him to keep it confidential and only share the charges and my plea with Uncle Jack. That night, Sam confirmed that Uncle Jack was on his way and advised me to say nothing at my arraignment except for my not guilty plea. The following day, I appeared via video for my arraignment. I pleaded not guilty to every charge. The prosecutor argued for no bail, but the judge allowed me to remain in the hospital for 2 more days before transferring me to county jail. The day before my transfer, Uncle Jack arrived. He officially took over my case and was given permission to visit. The sight of him made everything hit me like a ton of bricks, and I teared up as the weight of my situation became fully real. After a quick hug, Uncle Jack got straight to business, ensuring we had privacy to talk. He filled me in on the family, reassuring me that the kids were safe and still with Melissa until the police wrapped up their investigation. According to Uncle Jack, Melissa was confused about what had really happened. Lauren had given her a twisted version of the story, but after knowing me for years, Melissa found it hard to believe. She was relieved Uncle Jack was on the case. Uncle Jack leaned in and asked me for my side of the story. In low whispers, I laid it all out, Chris's threats, Tony's attack, and how Lauren had probably helped create this false story after I was arrested. I also mentioned that I had video evidence of the whole incident on my iPhone, which was hidden in the kitchen drawer back at the house. Jack didn't show much emotion, but I caught a flicker of relief in his eyes. If there's solid evidence, we've got a fighting chance. I'll be your guardian angel through this, Mike. You just focus on healing. I'll handle the defense and see what I can do about getting bail, he said. He also promised to check in on the kids and coordinate with Melissa. 3 days later, I was transferred to county jail. At my next court appearance, Uncle Jack worked his magic, and I was released on bail, though under house arrest. Uncle Jack had rented a townhouse in a gated community where I'd stay under his watch. I couldn't leave the area, but it was still a huge relief to be out of jail. Jack got to work immediately. He hired a private investigator to start tracking down leads, but our biggest challenge was getting my phone from the house. The evidence on it could turn the case around, but we couldn't risk retrieving it illegally, that would only bring more trouble. Jack assured me he'd figure it out, but it might take some time. In the meantime, Uncle Jack got us new cell phones so we could talk securely. One evening, I called my neighbor, Colonel Jim Hendricks, who had noticed some strange activity at my house. When I told Uncle Jack about it, he suggested we invite Jim over for steaks and beers to see what he knew. Over dinner, Jim shared a disturbing story. About a week after the whole mess, he saw 2 guys dressed in black trying to pick the lock on my garage door. The colonel grabbed his dog and a baseball bat and confronted them. Startled, the men backed off but not before threatening him. They then fled in a black SUV with a smudged license plate. Jim called the police, but by the time they arrived, the men were long gone. Thanks to Jim's quick thinking, my car was safe, he'd moved it to a secure location. Hearing that was a relief, especially since Chris had earlier threatened to plant drugs in my vehicle. Jim had another interesting detail. 2 days after Lauren returned to the house, he spotted the same black SUV parked out front. He saw the same 2 men talking to Lauren near the open garage, gesturing toward the spot where my car used to be. After a short conversation, they went inside and stayed for about 45 minutes before leaving. This time, Jim was able to jot down the license plate number. Uncle Jack ran the plate through his contacts and found it was registered to a company called Unique Services, a private investigation firm. The firm employed 2 guys, Jose Gonzalez and Miguel Ortega, both former cops with shady records. Jose had resigned after a theft scandal, and Miguel had been fired for falsifying evidence. No surprise, Chris Morrison's law firm was one of their clients. Getting my phone back was more urgent than ever. Uncle Jack decided it was time to make his move. He called Lauren, suggesting they meet to discuss the possibility of dropping the charges and working things out. Lauren knew Jack from family gatherings, but she was still cautious. She agreed to meet, but only if one of her lawyer's assistants could be present. Uncle Jack didn't hesitate, he agreed. At exactly 6 p.m. the next day, Uncle Jack arrived at the house. Lauren greeted him warmly at the door, offering a quick hug. She was dressed simply, in a modest skirt and blouse, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Inside, a young man named Gordon Merritt, an associate from Chris Morrison's law firm, was waiting. Uncle Jack introduced himself, and the three of them settled into the family room. Rachel offered to make some coffee, but Merritt waved her off, suggesting they dive straight into business. He pulled out a tape recorder, and Uncle Jack did the same, exchanging a polite nod with Merritt. Uncle Jack started the conversation by expressing regret over how things had gotten so out of hand. He mentioned how he had always admired Lauren and me as a couple. Lauren responded with a sad nod, saying she never intended for everything to unravel like this. Uncle Jack continued, subtly implying that he believed the charges against me. He brought up that I had claimed Lauren and Chris were having an affair, and that seeing Chris at the house had pushed me over the edge. Merritt jumped in quickly, stating that the evidence against me looked pretty solid. Uncle Jack leaned forward, looking thoughtful, and suggested that maybe I hadn't been thinking clearly, overwhelmed by the belief that Chris was stealing my wife. Merritt considered this for a moment, admitting that they might be open to reducing some of the charges, but only if I agreed to plead guilty to a few. Do all the charges need to stick, or could some be reduced or dropped? Uncle Jack asked, sounding cooperative. Merritt glanced at Lauren before responding. I'll have to check with Chris. He's got some pull with the DA and might want to settle this quietly to protect his reputation. Before they wrapped up, Uncle Jack softened his tone and reminded Lauren that I loved and missed the kids. Then, with a sharp turn, he warned her that if the truth came out, she could face serious charges for perjury and obstruction of justice. He directed the same warning at Merritt, suggesting that if he knowingly supported a false narrative, he could face legal consequences as well. With that, Uncle Jack stood up and politely asked if he could grab a glass of water. Lauren, unaware of his real intent, pointed him toward the kitchen. Once in the kitchen, Uncle Jack made sure he couldn't be seen from the family room. He opened the refrigerator loudly, then quickly searched the drawer by the sink. After a quick look, he found my iPhone, tucked under a stack of dish towels. He swiftly pocketed it, poured himself a glass of water, and casually returned to the family room about 2 minutes later. Before I go, Lauren, is there anything else you'd like to say? Uncle Jack asked, standing by the door. Lauren glanced nervously at Merritt, who replied for her. We've said all we need to for now, Mr. Carter. If any changes are made to the charges, your cooperation will be required for this case to disappear. Uncle Jack nodded, thanked them for their time, and left. He didn't bring the iPhone straight back to the townhouse. Instead, he took it to a digital forensics firm, Digital Analysis Solutions, DAS. He knew how crucial the video and audio recordings on the phone were and wanted to ensure everything was handled with care. DAS agreed to take on the job and promised results within a few days. When Uncle Jack and I visited DAS, they had already transferred all the data from the phone to their secure servers. They located the key video of the incident and made several copies, ensuring nothing could be lost or tampered with. We watched the video together. It clearly showed Tony pulling a gun on me, and while parts of it were a bit blurry, the critical moments were captured. DAS also uncovered 97 unopened emails and 64 text messages, all sent after the incident. Most were from friends and family, but one suspicious message contained 27 photos that would have automatically downloaded to my phone if I had opened it. It seemed pretty clear that Chris had tried to plant evidence on my phone after I destroyed my laptop. Uncle Jack thanked the DAS team and left the phone with them for safekeeping. We took a few copies of the video with us. As we discussed our next move, Uncle Jack considered presenting the evidence to the DA right away. That could potentially get the charges dropped and even implicate Chris, Tony, and Lauren in perjury and obstruction. But if Chris's influence was as strong as we feared, the DA might just try to quietly bury the case. The other option was to wait until the hearing. We could let the prosecution present its case, and then hit them with the evidence at the right moment, forcing them to prosecute Chris, Tony, and Lauren. That could mean serious jail time for them, and a stronger chance of me getting custody of the kids. When Uncle Jack asked me how I wanted to proceed, I didn't even hesitate. "Let's burn them all," I said firmly. A grin spread across Uncle Jack's face. "I was hoping you'd say that, Mike. I've been itching for my Perry Mason moment in court." With 3 weeks to go until the hearing, Uncle Jack got to work prepping our case. He decided that showing the video too early might lead to it being suppressed, so he kept it under wraps, planning for the perfect time to drop the bombshell. About a week before the hearing, Uncle Jack had to head back to San Francisco for some court obligations and to spend time with his family. While he was away, I got a call from the gate guard at the townhouse, letting me know that Lauren was at the gate, asking to see me. My heart started pounding. I immediately called Uncle Jack for advice. "If she wants to talk, hear her out, but remember, she's dangerous. Keep your cool, don't touch her, and stay polite," Uncle Jack warned, his voice firm. "Don't worry, Uncle Jack," I said. "She's nothing but poison to me now." "You know what you've got to do, right?" he asked, making sure I understood the stakes. "Yeah, Uncle Jack, I do." After hanging up, I called the gate and told security to let her in. With a few minutes to spare before she arrived, I hurried to tidy up the townhouse, knowing this conversation was going to be a big one. I cleared the legal papers off the dining table and tossed them on the bed, gathered the empty beer cans, cleaned the kitchen, and threw the dishes in the dishwasher. I changed into some Dockers and a knit shirt, combed my hair, and left the 3-day stubble for a more serious look. When Lauren knocked, I opened the door. She looked stunning, clearly putting effort into her appearance, a red pleated skirt, a pink cashmere sweater, her hair loosely styled up, and her makeup soft and subtle. "Come on in, Lauren," I said, stepping aside. "You look nice." "Thank you, Mike." "You look good too," she said, giving me a once-over. "You've lost some weight." "I've had time to work out and eat better," I replied, motioning for her to sit on the couch. I poured her a glass of white wine and sat down next to her with a glass of red for myself. After a few sips, I cut straight to it. "So, what brings you here, Lauren?" I asked. "Mike, despite everything, I still love you." "I never wanted it to get this far," she said, her voice softer than it had been in a long time. "I thought you'd accept my relationship with Chris, and we could have had a lot of money, a good life. Over time, I thought things would go back to normal." "I'm sorry I ruined your plans," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "It wasn't really my plan. It was Chris's," she admitted. "He thought he could scare you into going along with it, like he does with everyone else. Neither of us expected you to fight back." "Guess he didn't see that coming," I said, locking eyes with her. Out of nowhere, Lauren asked, "Where's your car?" I smirked. "I moved it after Chris threatened to plant drugs in it." "By the way, what were those guys doing at the house after you came back?" "They seemed pretty interested in the garage, especially once they realized my car was gone." Lauren hesitated for a moment, then admitted, "They wanted to plant evidence. I didn't want them to, but Chris insisted." "You didn't seem to have any issues stacking evidence against me," I shot back, my voice sharper now. "If you really love me, then just tell the truth. That'll get the charges dropped." "I can't, Mike," she said quietly, staring down at her wine. "I'm in too deep. Chris has control over everything." "Guess that leaves me out of luck," I muttered. Shifting gears, I asked, "And what about the accusation of abuse?" I've seen the photos of your bruises, but I never laid a hand on you. Lauren looked down again. That was Chris's idea. He made up the story, that you went crazy, accused us of the affair, and attacked me. Max tried to intervene, and you shot him. To make it look real, Chris hit me to create the bruises. We've been practicing the story ever since. I'm sorry, Mike. I never wanted it to go this far. I wish things could go back to how they used to be, she added, her voice trembling slightly. That's not going to happen, I said flatly. Lauren then made her real offer. Chris knows about your PTSD. He wants you to plead guilty, claiming it triggered the incident. He'll use his influence to get you placed in a veterans hospital for treatment. You could be out in a year, maybe less, and we could start over with the kids. So that's why she had really come, to get me to take the fall. She was promising that Chris would make sure I ended up with a light sentence in a veterans facility. I didn't buy it, but I played along. That sounds reasonable, Lauren, I said slowly. But I'll need some time to think about it. I should probably run it by Uncle Jack, too. He might agree. I doubt Jack has much to work with, considering the testimonies from me, Chris, and Max, Lauren said, sounding hopeful. Please, Mike, do this for yourself, for me, for the kids. In a few years, this will all be behind us, just a bump in the road. I laughed bitterly. A bump? You've been with another man for months, expected me to just go along with it while you slept with your boss, threatened to take the kids away if I didn't play along, and now you've made up lies that could send me to prison. That's a hell of a lot more than a bump in the road. That's why I want you to accept Chris's offer. It's the easiest way out for all of us, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. Like I said, I'll think about it, I replied, my voice colder now. Just when I thought the conversation was over, Lauren surprised me by placing her hand on mine. Maybe we could rest together for a little while, she whispered. I've missed having you beside me. Can we just fall asleep together tonight and forget about everything for a few hours? That's not happening, Lauren, I said firmly, pulling my hand away. She got the hint. Please think about Chris's offer, she said as I walked her to the door. Before she left, she gave me a hug. It felt sincere, but I didn't return it. The hearing was set to determine if I'd be held for further investigation. The prosecution, confident in their case, called Chris, Max, and Lauren to the stand. Their stories were perfectly rehearsed, each one sticking to the same false narrative. Uncle Jack, keeping it simple, asked each witness only one question: do you swear your testimony is truthful? All three of them, Chris, Max, and Lauren, answered without hesitation, swearing their testimonies were truthful. Uncle Jack had considered going after Jose and Miguel, the two men who had tried to break into my garage, but their involvement wasn't directly relevant to the charges against me. Since they hadn't managed to plant any evidence, there wasn't much we could use from that incident to strengthen my defense. Once the prosecution rested, it was Uncle Jack's turn. He rose from his seat and addressed the judge with a calm confidence. The defense would like to introduce a videotape as evidence, he said, holding up the most critical piece of our case. This tape is exculpatory, Your Honor. Almost immediately, the assistant prosecutor jumped up to object. This is new evidence that hasn't been presented for review. There's a reason for that, Uncle Jack explained. The defense has concerns about bias from the district attorney and the court, and we feared this evidence would be unfairly blocked. Do you have proof that the district attorney is compromised, Mr. Carter? The judge asked, raising an eyebrow. The proof is on the video, Your Honor, Uncle Jack replied smoothly. The judge, clearly annoyed now, began to rise from his seat. Very well. You and the prosecution will join me in my chambers where I will review the tape and determine if it's admissible. But Uncle Jack wasn't finished. No, Your Honor, we're not going to do that. The judge froze, his frustration evident. And why not? He demanded. Because, Uncle Jack said, his voice steady, the defense doesn't trust the court to remain impartial, and we won't risk you suppressing this evidence." The judge, now visibly irritated, leaned forward. "Are you accusing this court of corruption, Mr. Carter?" "Possibly, Your Honor," Uncle Jack replied, completely unflinching. The judge's expression hardened. "Can you prove that accusation, or is this so-called proof also on your tape?" "It is on the tape," Uncle Jack confirmed. "But I can make my point clear if you'll allow me to ask you a few questions." The judge, looking both skeptical and intrigued, clarified, "So, if I understand you correctly, you believe you can demonstrate bias by asking me a few questions. Is that correct, Mr. Carter?" "Yes, Your Honor," Uncle Jack said firmly. The judge, his curiosity piqued, leaned back slightly. "Very well, Mr. Carter, ask your questions. But let me be clear, if you fail to prove your point, we will review the tape in chambers, and I will rule on its admissibility." "I understand, Your Honor," Uncle Jack agreed calmly. "But let me make this clear, if the tape is ruled inadmissible, and my client is convicted based solely on the testimonies of the prosecution's witnesses, I will release the tape to the media and the public, regardless of your ruling. Furthermore, the tape contains evidence that will bring your integrity into question should you choose to suppress it." The judge's face darkened as he absorbed the implied threat. "I feel like you're trying to intimidate me, Mr. Carter." Before the judge could get any angrier, Uncle Jack quickly launched into his first question. "Your oldest son is in college, correct, Your Honor?" "He's currently attending the Air Force Academy." The judge, taken slightly off guard, answered cautiously, "Yes, he's a freshman." Uncle Jack pressed on. "Getting into the Air Force Academy is extremely competitive, isn't it?" The judge nodded. "It is." Uncle Jack continued, "First, your son had to be nominated by your district's congressman or senator. After that, he was scheduled for a civil service exam. Based on his performance, he was selected alongside 9 others. Then he had to undergo medical exams, a physical fitness test, and an aptitude test for pilot and navigator training. He also took the usual college entrance exams, correct?" The judge, his initial frustration fading, nodded again, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "Yes, that's all correct. He maintained an A- GPA throughout high school and was on the swim team every year." "You must be understandably proud of him, Your Honor," Uncle Jack said, then added, "But who wrote the 3rd letter of recommendation for your son's application to the Air Force Academy?" The judge paused, then replied, "Mr. Stanley Cross wrote my son a recommendation for admission." Uncle Jack jumped on the opportunity. "Mr. Cross must know your son very well, unless, of course, he fabricated a letter full of false information." The judge clarified, "My son worked in Mr. Cross's office during his sophomore and junior years of high school. He's interested in becoming a lawyer someday." "So, Mr. Cross is a family friend?" Uncle Jack pressed further. "He's more of a professional acquaintance," the judge answered carefully. "We are both members of some legal organizations." Uncle Jack then made his point. "So now, Your Honor, you can understand why the defense is concerned about your impartiality in this case." The judge shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Counselor, you've raised a question that challenges my integrity. Let me assure you, any connection with Mr. Cross won't influence my decisions. But I see the matter of perception you've brought up." There was a long, tense pause as the judge considered. Finally, he looked up and said, "Play the video, Counselor." Uncle Jack signaled the bailiff to dim the lights and lower the projection screens on either side of the bench. He turned to me and whispered, "It's showtime, Mike." Then he pressed play, and the video began. The entire courtroom watched as the scene unfolded, with Chris's face filling the screen as he made his threats, his voice cold and self-assured. "I personally know most of the top police officials. I'm friends with a lot of attorneys in the DA's office. I've even had some fun with a few of them," Chris bragged on the video. A gasp rose from the prosecution's side. The assistant DA, visibly shaken, lowered her head onto the table, her body trembling before she broke into sobs. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as she gathered her things and fled, still crying. Unfazed, Uncle Jack kept his eyes on the screen. Chris, Max, and Lauren tried to quietly slip out of the courtroom, but they were quickly noticed. The judge, his face set in stone, firmly ordered them to stay seated. The remaining prosecutors watched the video with tense expressions, the lead prosecutor now pale and standing abruptly as if seeking a way out. Before he could speak, Uncle Jack cut him off. "I have another video," he said. Without waiting for permission, he queued up the second recording, explaining that it was made 2 weeks ago during Lauren's visit to my townhouse. He pressed play again. As the video started, it was clear Lauren suddenly realized the enormity of what was about to come. The video showed her confessing to the entire plot that Chris had orchestrated against me. "Mike, how could you do this to me?" Lauren cried out, panicking as the reality of the situation hit her full force. Across the room, Chris grasped the gravity of their mistake. "Max, you fool. You absolute fool." Chris shouted at Lauren. "You let him record you. What were you thinking?" Lauren had no idea that when she visited me, I'd set my phone to record everything. I'd placed it on the coffee table, hidden among a stack of books and papers. The recording started just before I opened the door to let her in. The assistant district attorney, shaken by the unfolding evidence, requested a recess to review the new material. Uncle Jack calmly handed over copies of the videos on DVDs, and the judge adjourned the trial until the next morning. The following day, the three key witnesses for the prosecution, Chris, Max, and Lauren, were nowhere to be seen. Instead, sitting at the prosecution table was the county's actual district attorney. The judge allowed him to speak first. "I'll keep this brief, Your Honor," the district attorney began. "First, all charges against Mr. Thompson are hereby dismissed. We believe his actions were in self-defense when he defended himself against Mr. Morrison and Mr. Franco. It was a violent self-defense, but self-defense nonetheless. Second, my office has issued arrest warrants for Mr. Chris Morrison, Mr. Tony Franco, and Mrs. Lauren Thompson for conspiracy to commit perjury, bribery, perjury, assault with intent to cause grievous harm, making false statements to the police, filing false complaints, and obstruction of justice. Additionally, we have been informed that Mr. Morrison attempted to plant false evidence against Mr. Thompson, and both Mr. Franco and Mrs. Thompson were aware of this." He continued, "We have also identified 2 suspects hired by Mr. Morrison who attempted to plant the false evidence, and we are in the process of arresting them as well." Later that day, Chris Morrison, Tony Franco, and my wife Lauren were all arrested, though they were released on bail shortly afterward. The district attorney, furious upon discovering how deeply his office had been compromised by Chris's influence over the years, started an internal investigation, rooting out all the colleagues who had been involved in Morrison's schemes. In the end, all the defendants were convicted. Chris was the only one who pled not guilty, which turned out to be a major mistake. Both Tony and Lauren pled guilty and testified against him. Chris was sentenced to 11 years in prison, while Tony received a 7-year sentence. Lauren was sentenced to 5 years. Jose and Miguel, the 2 men Chris had hired to tamper with evidence, were also arrested on charges of obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. The district attorney played them against each other, and eventually, Miguel cracked, confessing in the hopes of receiving a lighter sentence. Both men ended up serving lengthy prison terms. Chris remained in county jail until he was transferred to state prison. Tony and Lauren, on the other hand, were given 2 weeks to get their affairs in order before surrendering to the sheriff. During that time, Tony focused on preparing his family for his 7-year absence, hoping for early parole after 4 years with good behavior, as his lawyer had advised.